Math isn't music. In fact, it helps the part of your brain that does analysis. Because the goal is to make people feel something through music, I've always called it emotional mathematics. Gregg Rolie, the man who helped two of the best rock bands ever, but whose name isn't usually the first one that comes to mind. He was Black Magic Woman's voice actor and the person who provided the first vocals for Oye Como Va and Evil Ways. He was a great pianist who added Latin rock to the story of Santana and later laid the groundwork for Journey, where he also sang lead. People think of Carlos when they hear the name Santana. When you say Journey, they name Steve Perry. Also, Gregg Rolie was there. In a quiet, modest way that can't be replaced, Gregg Rolie never sought fame for more than 50 years. He left fame in silence and came back just as quietly. Every note he played continued to inspire. There are no secrets, gimmicks, or shocking news stories. There is only music and a life dedicated to it. Even though Rolie was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, an honor given to very few people, he never thought of himself as a legend. He was honest, quiet, and dependable, and he just lived as a singer. This is the story of Gregg Rolie, a person who was already well known. Although this artist came out of the dark, they left a mark that will never be erased by history. Beginnings. He was born on June 17, 1947, in Seattle, Washington, a city known for its royalty. The quiet, reflective afternoons there seemed to shape his thoughtful nature from a young age. Soon after, though, he moved with his family to Palo Alto, California, which was sunny, had good schools, and was full of American hopes after the war. Growing up, Gregg lived in a home that was neither poor nor rich. Even though Gregg's parents weren't artists, they always told him to listen to himself, which he did. Other kids were playing baseball or being crazy about Hot Wheels, but he sat in front of an old piano and slowly learned each sound. There was no lightning strike when he heard music. Like a steady stream, it came. He did not go to a music school or study with a famous teacher. Listening to Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, and then Ray Charles helped him learn. Every record was like a school, and every solo was like a chance to grow inside himself. At Cubberley High School, Gregg was a quiet student who liked technical drawing and once thought about becoming an engineer. But the nights he sneaked out to practice with William Penn and his friends in his first garage band were what really made his heart race. That wasn't just rebelliousness as a teen. It was a wake-up call he couldn't avoid. His upbringing wasn't hard. There were no family disasters or old wounds for him to write about in his songs. But maybe that peace and quiet helped him write the kind of music that would later be so personal. The kind that doesn't need to brag or shout, but is still important enough to make you feel something. Gregg Rolie didn't draw from his rough background in his music. He taught people early on that great art doesn't have to be loud. Beginners in their careers. In the late 1960s, California was awash with psychedelic vibes, anti-war protests, and a cultural thirst for freedom. That's when Gregg Rolie met Carlos Santana, a young Mexican guitarist whose eyes seemed to look into a spiritual world. They were the complete opposite of each other. Gregg was a steady and sensible person. His favorite songs had tight arrangements, clear melodies, and short words. What about Carlos? He played music like he was trying to connect with everything in the universe. His guitar solos could loop for 10 minutes, making you feel almost like you're in a dream. Still, this difference may have been what made something truly unique. A mix of rock, blues, Latin, and trippy music. Gritty and calming at the same time. The band was called the Santana Blues Band in 1966, but it was later just called Santana. In the following years, they played in bars, clubs, and public concerts. However, Santana really came into his own at Woodstock in 1969, when hundreds of thousands of people gathered on a muddy field in upstate New York. Something new became famous at that very moment. When the Latin rhythms shook the room, the guitar wailed, and Gregg Rolie's voice rose from his Hammond organ. Rolie did not need to wear flashy clothes. They weren't the band's lead singer, but his voice, which was rough, thick, and strong, became the sound of songs like Evil Ways, Black Magic Woman, and Oye Como Virginia. In a band with a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, he was like a silent leader. His playing kept the group together, which Santana could have lost in his spiritual and philosophical pursuits. The album Abraxas, released in 1970, was without a doubt a high point. But the cracks got worse as the lights shone brighter on them. Carlos Santana began to look inside himself that he began incorporating spiritual lessons, meditation, and freeform jazz into the band's music after being inspired by Guru Sri Chinmoy. It made Rolie worried. The crowd was getting lost as the music lost its focus. In the studio, things got worse. Carlos wanted to jam, or play music without any rules. Rolie wanted order, songs that had a start, a middle, and an end. They had long arguments that went late into the night. They would sometimes stop talking. Rolie later remembered that we were still making music together, but we weren't really listening to each other. Some members started calling their shows spiritual battles on stage because things were getting so bad. Carlos thought of the band as a way to go on a spiritual trip. Rolie only wanted the music to talk to people's hearts in a real way. Following 3 records and many shows, Gregg Rolie left Santana in 1972. There will be no news conference or dramatic goodbye. He quietly but firmly turned around and left the way he came, that he couldn't stay in a place where music didn't touch him anymore. His leaving wasn't a loss. It was an honest moment and the start of a new, just as amazing story. A trip called Journey, where Gregg Rolie would rise again and give rock music a new sound in the 1970s. Second part of founding Journey. Following his departure from Santana in 1972, Gregg Rolie did not get lost, but also did not rush into anything either. Quitting a band when they were at the top meant giving up fame, money, and a lot of chances. Though Rolie never liked being the center of attention, he had to take some time to think about himself and decide if music was still calling him or just a memory. He stayed in touch with Neil Schon, the young guitarist who had played with him in Santana during that time of peace. Both men were drawn into Carlos Santana's more spiritual outlook, and they both thought it was time to make something new. A band that isn't trying to be the next big thing in philosophy. They just play music that comes naturally to them. When they started Journey together in 1973, they wanted to bring rock music to the point where technique and feeling meet. In the beginning, the band mostly played complicated experimental music that mixed progressive rock with jazz fusion. Gregg Rolie sang lead and played keyboards, and he put the famous Hammond B3 at the center of the band's sound. In 1975, Journey released their first record, which was a pure progressive rock work with lots of instrumentals. Rolie was the heart of the sound. He played the Hammond organ and had a deep, swirling tone. He also sang lead vocals in a blues rock style that was dry, bold, and honest. Even though Journey's record wasn't a big hit, it was a statement from a band that wouldn't back down. The band kept exploring new sounds on albums like Look Into the Future, 1976, and Next, 1977. But there were signs of a mismatch. Their music was thought to be too intellectual for most people, and Columbia Records kept pushing the band to find a lead singer who was easier for most people to understand. It was a soft but painful blow for Gregg Rolie, whose singing made Santana famous in the beginning and is now the lead singer of Journey. Pressures from businesses grew, and after a lot of tense talks within the band, Steve Perry, a young tenor known as the Sam Cooke of rock, was brought into Journey in 1977. Not out of anger, but with clarity, Gregg Rolie welcomed Perry that he could see Perry's business promise but understood it well. He was no longer the lead singer of Journey after this. With the release of Infinity in 1978, a new era began. Steve Perry was now singing lead, and Rolie took a back seat and focused on keyboards and backup vocals. Don't get the wrong idea, though. Gregg was Perry's teacher in those early days, helping him learn the language of the band, keep the beat, and keep the tensions from turning into real splits. Gregg may have been the only one who could have done that, because he was the founder and knew when to step back. Lights and Wheel in the Sky, 2 games that came out after Infinity, were huge hits. Journey became one of the best concert rock bands in America with the release of Evolution in 1979 and Departure in 1980. Unfortunately, Rolie was losing strength. He only played because he had to because of busy tour schedules, pressures in the studio, and a growing loss of touch with the band's original musical style. After finishing Departure in 1980, Gregg Rolie chose to leave Journey. There wasn't any trouble or complaints. Even his own replacement, Jonathan Cain, the pianist for the band The Babies, was on the list. As a quiet rite of musical passing, Rolie gave the Hammond B3 to the new owner. There was no one who pushed him. He made the choice to step down, which is like a director leaving the stage when his symphony is over. I'm proud of Journey's success, but I'm no longer a real part of it, Rolie once said. I also didn't want to bend the rules to keep going. He went back home and found his wife Lori and their two young children waiting for him. He lived without platinum records or sold-out tours for almost 20 years after that. Instead, he had peace, truth, and family, which were things that no stage could ever give him. Time to relax and come back. Gregg Rolie stopped being in rock bands after he left Journey in 1980. There are no new singles, TV performances, or interviews that make the news. It might have looked like he was done to the public, but it was really just the start of a new chapter, one where quiet things were important. He went back home and did something he hadn't really done in almost 20 years. He got married, had kids, and lived a normal life. From his house near Austin, Texas, he took his kids to school, played music at night, and read books before going to bed. There was no stage, no crowd, and no stress. Although he never stopped loving music. Rolie came back quietly in 1991, not in front of bright lights, but with old friends. He made a band called The Storm with Ross Valerie, Steve Smith, and other ex-Journey members. There were no big expectations, just experienced artists getting back to the fun of playing for love, not the charts. The song, I've Got a Lot to Learn About Love, rose to number 6 on the Billboard mainstream rock chart, which was a surprise. It wasn't a huge storm, but it did what it set out to do. I could still see Rally.at times. He could still make something that got people to pay attention. Meanwhile, Interscope Records put the band's second album, Eye of the Storm, on hold forever. Grateful Dead had taken over the music scene, and artists like Rolie didn't seem to fit in with a group that didn't believe in love songs driven by Hammond organ. Not scared, Rolie went back to his roots. He got back together with Michael Shreve, Jose Arias, and other ex-Santana bandmates in 1998 to start the Latin rock band Abraxas Pool. The band's first record was both a nod to the past and a statement. Artists who used to make magic at Woodstock could still make songs that made people feel things even after they turned 50. Even though Abraxas Pool didn't last long, it gave Rolie something very important. He felt at peace with the Santana era, which he had left behind with inner turmoil. It had been almost 30 years since Rolie had played the old songs with old friends, and no more fighting over art or stress, just music and respect for each other. One-person show. Gregg Rolie quit his job as the lead singer and co-founder of two famous bands and went on a solo trip with a completely different mindset. To present himself honestly, freely, and without trying to please anyone, not to make hits or become famous. Gregg Rolie was his first record as a solo artist, which came out in 1985. That after decades of working with other people, it was seen as a personal musical statement. He mixed his trademark Hammond-rich keyboard textures with smooth guitar lines to make an AOR album-oriented rock and classic rock record. The song, I Want to Go Back, wasn't very popular at the time, but Eddie Money later made it a hit, which is a quiet testament to Rolie's long-lasting and underrated musical skills. After 2 years, in 1987, he released his second record, Gringo. Gringo was a bigger statement than the launch. Latin rock came back into its own, mixing with world music, funk, and jazz rock. It was Rolie's way of exploring his Santana roots from his own unique point of view. Critics said that Rolie's most character-filled album, Gringo, was a mix of old and new, technique and feeling, Latin percussion and classic keyboards, even though it wasn't highly promoted. Rolie came back in 2001 with Roots, after a long break spent with his family and playing shows with The Storm and Abraxas Pool. It was clear from the name that he was going back to his creative roots. Rolie sang, played keyboards, and produced the record, which was full of blues, soul, and jam band influences. It wasn't a record made to get a lot of attention. It was made to live honestly through music, without any editing or worry about radio play. Roots became a fan favorite because it gave a close look at an artist who was tired of the business but still loved music. After almost 20 years, Gregg Rolie didn't put out another record until February 2019, called Sonic Ranch. The album, which was recorded at the famous Texas studio with the same name, has everything that makes Rolie's sound unique. Latin themes, strong classic rock roots, keyboard-driven stories, and a voice that isn't as fiery from being young, but is more true and worn than ever. Songs like What About Love and Don't Be Cruel sound like confessions from a man who used to be famous but now finds comfort in music. Even though the media doesn't praise Gregg Rolie as much as they did when he was in Santana or Journey, his independent work is a return to his roots. He was the only one there. No fancy studios or pushy managers. He played the Hammond B3 all the time and told stories in chords. Not to be praised, but just to be let alone. Everyday life. Gregg Rolie is an exception in a world where rock artists are often linked to bad relationships, messy divorces, or constant scandal. Not because he never put himself out there, but because he always knew when to leave the stage and find a quiet place to breathe. In the late 1970s, when his work with Journey was really taking off, he married Lori Rowley. They happened to meet on a plane. Rowley was a traveling singer, and Lori worked as a flight attendant. There wasn't a Hollywood-style romance. Instead, it was a steady friendship based on trust and respect. Choosing to put family ahead of fame was an unusual move for touring acts. When Rowley quit Journey in 1980, he did something that not many singers at the time were willing to do. He started looking after his kids full-time, but he said once, "I didn't want to be the guy whose kids only knew him from music magazines." He is married to Lori, and they have a son and female child. In the early 1990s, Rowley's old Journey bandmates had big hits like Open Arms and Faithfully. At the same time, he was turning his garage into a music room, teaching his kids how to play instruments, and driving them to parent-teacher conferences. Rowley also created the music for the audiobook versions of his wife Lori's children's book series, Meme's Little World, which was based on their family. He helped out quietly, behind the scenes, and never wanted to be the center of attention. This is similar to how he has lived his whole life. He doesn't need to be seen. He just wants to be a part of something important. Near Austin, Texas, Rowley lives with his family. He has his own studio, a small yard, and a life that is slow enough that he can still hear the Hammond organ on a quiet afternoon. Even though he used to put on loud shows at Madison Square Garden, his current happiness comes from playing music with friends. This is when his grandchild asks him, "Were you really famous?" At sunset, he doesn't feel rushed. He has never been in the tabloids or had to say sorry in public for something he did wrong. In Gregg Rowley's case, staying quiet has always been an option. It wasn't that he couldn't make noise. He just didn't think it was necessary. Legacy and power. There was never a time when Gregg Rowley's name was on a magazine cover. Even though he didn't start a movement or a culture revolution and didn't make rock music about politics or spirituality, he did something that very few musicians in the history of music have ever done. During the early days of not one but two famous bands, he helped shape their sound. He was the lead singer for Santana's first few albums and the voice behind hits like Black Magic Woman, Evil Ways, and Oye Como Virginia. He didn't just sing. He played the Hammond B3 and was the heart of those early songs. He brought Latin rock to big American stages for the first time, from Fillmore West to Woodstock. While Carlos Santana was interested in meditation and the universe, Rowley kept the music grounded with blues rock roots that made it easy for people who had never heard a conga drum before to understand. With Journey, he started a whole new era of American progressive rock that was technical, powerful, and made for arenas. Even though they weren't big hits at the time, the band's first 3 records set the stage for what would become one of rock's biggest acts. When Steve Perry took the lead, Gregg Rolie quietly stepped back, playing the keyboards, singing chorus, and keeping the peace during a delicate power shift. There aren't many musicians who used to lead bands who could do that. He started 2 bands, laid down 2 sound plans, and quit both when he didn't feel like he fit anymore. As a result, Gregg Rolie was admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. First with Santana in 1998, and then again with Journey in 2017. But it's a rare honor. But the man who chose quiet over self-praise deserves it. He doesn't have power by making big claims. It comes from the noises he made. The blazing Hammond B3 that starts Black Magic Woman, a voice as thick as cigarette smoke but full of feeling, and the solid, unshakable piano that puts up the brighter stars. It comes from someone who was a pillar without having to be in the center. There's no doubt that Gregg Rolie changed the course of rock history. But if you look closely, you can see his name on the first pages of at least 2 of its most important books. Today's life. At age 77, Gregg Rolie doesn't play every night, but that doesn't mean he no longer loves music. In fact, he's more in love with music than ever before. There's no stress, no limits, and nothing to show that he lives with his wife, Lori Rowley, in a quiet house near Austin, Texas. In the mornings, they garden, and in the late afternoons, they often have a light jam session in his home studio. There will be no more difficult tour plans. Not any more studio due dates. To take a step back from the world, Gregg Rolie has decided to live a life that is deeply connected to music, which has always made him feel alive. As a surprise, he showed up at a community music event at the University of Texas in 2024 and played with the Longhorn Marching Band. Not to cover a Santana or Journey song, but to teach kids how to play from the heart instead of just using technique. Now, inspiring others is more important to him than acting for praise. His community recognized him in October 2024 as an artist who had left a lasting impression, not just for what he did on stage, but also for the kindness, quiet strength, and enduring spirit he still embodies. No longer is he known as the father of Journey or the legend of Santana. He is just known as Gregg, the artist. When asked about his musical impact in a rare interview in 2023, he just smiled and said, "I don't think I left anything that big behind. As luck would have it, I was in the right place with the right people and could hear my inner voice. There's no such thing as a perfect song, but mine did." Every day, he plays the piano and records new songs, even if they never get released. It keeps his heart from drying out. Lori's children's book series and educational charity projects are still supported by him. As the sun goes down, he still likes to sit on the porch with a cup of tea and play one of his old records while smiling. It still sounds fine. Gregg Rolie no longer wants to find an audience. Despite that, he still has one. Those who grew up with the Black Magic Woman fell in love with Rock Through the Wheel in the Sky. They saw something rare in him, unshakable grace that didn't need to be shown off. He was Santana's first singer, and his voice ushered the world into the lively world of Latin rock. The one who started Journey and made them into one of the most famous American bands ever. 2 times inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But he chose to live a quiet life in Texas with his family and an old Hammond B3 organ. When Gregg Rolie worked in a field where people usually have to yell to be heard, he chose to play, take a break when needed, and come back only when his heart told him to. He shows a simple but always true truth. It's not necessary for pioneers to stand in the road. Simply make a way for the music to flow, just like water. There are people in the spotlight who aren't legends. Like Gregg Rolie, some people only have to stand behind it to light up an entire era. It's likely that you've quietly passed through the world Gregg Rolie helped make if you've ever loved a Santana song or hummed along to a Journey tune. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to keep learning about the untold stories of music. The best stories always start where no one is watching. Cheers, and I'll see you in the next movie. Thanks for coming.